Hello, welcome to the book festival. All right, great. I can't believe we have a full house and it's torrential rain, but that's just a testament to our community and Iowa City and literature. Thank you for braving the weather. So I'll do brief introductions and then I'll hand it off to our panel here. Welcome to the 2017 Iowa City Book Festival, presented by the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature. You good? We would like to thank the sponsors who made this event possible: the City of Iowa City, the University of Iowa, the Iowa Arts Council, Iowa City Coralville Convention and Visitors Bureau, Iowa Public Radio, and the Tuesday Agency. Between events, please be sure to visit the book fair, which has been moved to Merge. There's free coffee, and you can shop with authors, artists, booksellers, and more, and enjoy free coffee. The vast majority of the book festival events are offered without charge, but they are not free. Your tax-deductible donation gives us the ability to offer programs like the festival. Please consider supporting the City of Literature by texting the word book to 319-774-7669, and that's also on your bookmark. Today, as part of the panel discussion, Publishing Now, Stories That Sell, we will hear from Inara, I'm so sorry.
It's okay,
Verzemnieks, Julia Fierro, Steve Semken, and Andrea Wilson, who will discuss their current projects, trends in the publishing industry, and their insights into process. Panelists will bring viewpoints from varying geographic regions, writing genres, and industry perspectives in order to shine a light into the literary world and help emerging writers consider the path to their own passion projects. The panel is moderated by Andrea Wilson. Inara teaches creative fiction at the University of Iowa. She has won a Pushcart Prize, a Rona Jaffe Writers Award, and has been a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in feature writing. She lives in Iowa City. She's my neighbor. Her book,
we have the power block.
Yeah. Her book, Among the Living and the Dead, finds Inara piecing together a family story rooted in World War II era Latvia. Julia Fierro is the author of the novels The Gypsy Moth Summer and Cutting Teeth. Her work has been published in Poets and Writers, BuzzFeed, Glamour, The Millions, Flavor Wire, and other publications, and she has been profiled in Brooklyn Magazine and the Elle Magazine, The Observer, and The Economist. A graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, she founded the Sackett Street Writers Workshop in 2002, which has grown into a creative home to 4,000 writers in New York City, Los Angeles, and online. Steve Semken founded Ice Cube Press in 1993 as a way to use the literary arts to better learn how to best live in the Midwest. Since then, he has published the work of hundreds of authors, both regional and national acclaim. He speaks and teaches throughout the Midwest on issues of creativity, entrepreneurship, writing, and publishing. His book, The Great Blues, was awarded the Kansas Book Award. Andrea is the founder of the Iowa Writers House, which started as an altruistic dream to create a springboard for all of those involved in using art and literature to connect themselves with the world. Today, the organization reaches more than 3,000 writers, offers workshops and programs in both Iowa City and Des Moines, and has created strategic relationships connecting Iowa with festivals in Puerto Rico, Cuba, and other cities of literature across the globe. Please help me welcome our panelists.
Thank you, everyone, and I just want to second what Rachel said, which is thank you for braving the rain and for representing the City of Literature so well. It's so nice to see all of you this morning. So we wanted to put together a panel on publishing because this festival has so many wonderful readings and opportunities for you to hear the work, but we know how many questions there are out there about publishing, about the process, how to get your work published. And so we really want this to be an opportunity this morning for all of us to share a little bit about our own stories, but then to give you the chance to ask the questions that you're interested in. So just to even base you a little more in the introductions, Julia, graduate of the workshop, but living in New York and bringing writing to people all across the East Coast who are interested in either getting their work published immediately or working towards applying for MFA programs. Inara graduated from the nonfiction program and teaching in the nonfiction program, and has also then come out in the community to teach at the Writers' House. And then Steve, a publisher here in the Midwest who's helping bring great and amazing stories to light. And then, as Rachel said, I'm the director of the Iowa Writers' House. So all of us have a different story into publishing and a different angle and a different just individual experience. And so I thought we could just start this morning with everyone sharing a little bit about their publishing story, if we will. And I'll go last.
Okay. Would you guys like to start?
We'd like you to start.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm living in Los Angeles right now, actually, and I haven't seen this kind of rain in like 3 years. So at first I was really excited, and then I was like, oh, shit. So I might steal somebody's umbrella, so you know, I'm not going to do that. Maybe. So I love to steal this quote from Fiona Mazel, who is a wonderful novelist, and I heard it at a Slice Publishing conference, which is an annual conference in New York City, and she said, "Success in publishing is being able to publish again," and I think that for me, that's really, you know, I just published my second book, which I'm just shocked that I actually even finished it, you know, got someone to publish it, you know, because it's just so much work. And but as many of you know, but my story starts at Iowa. Actually, you know, my first novel that I finished here did not get published, and so I was only, I think, 25, and I was not a prodigy. You know, I really didn't know how to write, and, you know, I needed to grow up before I could write a novel that was really what I feel like a story that deserved to be published. And so what I did was I stopped writing for about 7 years, which is not what anybody wants to hear. But what I did was I created a community in my home. I put an ad on Craigslist because in 2002, Craigslist was the answer to everything. And I started having all these wonderful writers, New York writers, come into my Brooklyn kitchen. They were stay-at-home parents, accountants, MTA workers, a lot of lawyers. And we, you know, workshopped and talked about reading and writing together. And over those 7 years, I learned how to write. And then I, after having 2 children, you know, which I do not suggest as a way to get your writing schedule in, you know, but it did help me actually, you know, sort of motivated me. I really used my writing time to write. I published my first novel. So for me, you know, my success story in publishing is not, I think the stories that we often hear about, you know, especially being in a city like Iowa City where there are many, like, I don't know, like young people who are publishing like straight out of the crib practically. You know, I think that we often hear that sort of overnight success story. And I remember coming to Iowa, I kind of owe the workshop everything because I come from people who were not educated. My father grew up during the war in Italy, didn't finish 4th grade. So I didn't know that you could be a writer. You know, it wasn't something that I even sort of fantasized about. I applied to MFA programs because my parents were like, you should get a master's degree. And I was like, this sounds like fun. And shockingly got into Iowa. And so really that permission, you know, not every writer needs that external permission. I do think we all need that yes, whether it's a yes from our writing community or from a publisher or a teacher or somebody. So for me, you know, I do doubt I would be published if I hadn't gone to an MFA program. For me, it was very important. But I do have one foot in sort of the MFA world because a lot of SACA writers go to MFA programs, including several every year go to Iowa, but also another foot in the sort of New York City, more commercial publishing world. And I do think that there's so many different paths to publication, especially now with the internet, with, you know, more, hopefully, more and more small presses, more, you know, sort of resources for people who want to self-publish. So yeah, I think I'll stop talking now. Thank you.
Inara?
So I also sort of represent the kind of path toward publishing that isn't necessarily a direct path. And I think that's far more common. I agree with Julia that what we tend to see emphasized are the stories where it seems like it's very linear and very immediate. And actually, I think the process represents in some ways the creation of a book, which is far more long and laborious than we ever really want to kind of acknowledge, because we'd never do it if we really, really talked about how much it takes. So in my particular case, I always knew that I wanted to write, but very specifically, I wanted to be a journalist. And so that's what I pursued fairly single-mindedly. I really didn't know at that point in time that the kind of writing I wanted to do, the impulses that I was channeling, could also exist in other forms. I just knew for sure that it could exist within a newsroom, it could exist at a daily newspaper, I could get gainful employment and benefits. And so I did that for about 13 years. And that was kind of my period of, that was my apprenticeship, really. I was writing a lot and writing daily and getting in those hours. And it did not really allow me to be precious. You were always as good as your next story, and I started over again. And I see now how important that period was, simply putting in the time, simply punching the clock, simply showing up every day and doing the work. At the same time, in doing that, I began to get, I think, a greater sense of what, I don't know, people always refer to as voice. They always think about, how do I find my voice? How do I get my voice? I really think voice, what we mean perhaps is another sense. What we mean is getting comfortable with your particular way of seeing, your way of seeing the world, your way of perceiving the world, your way of expressing the world. And so I began to get much more comfortable with sort of who I was, how my brain worked, what stood out to me. And I began to realize that what I wanted to do with writing probably wasn't going to be able to happen at the paper anymore. I'd sort of reached the edges of what I could do there. So it was time to push myself a little bit more. I always loved in the newsroom that we had a community of writers and that we had a community of people who pushed one another. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to leave a newsroom, where else do I find that community? And I realized probably to go back to school, probably to get my MFA, probably to be immersed in an environment where everyone was asking the same questions, their minds were sparking on the same passions. And I also knew that I wanted to perhaps teach. And so I also thought getting my MFA might allow me to do that in addition. And so I arrived here at Iowa, and I thought I had a project that I was going to work on during my time here, and very promptly was discouraged by one of my first workshop teachers, who basically wanted to emphasize to me that this was a chance to maybe not just do what I had always done, but a chance to find sort of new opportunities within my writing to become a different writer than who I had been before, but in that process of becoming a different writer, maybe becoming more myself. And so she kept kind of putting me in positions that were really uncomfortable, that were asking me to do writing that I had never really attempted before, namely writing with the I in it. And so basically she shoved me in the direction of memoir. And I remember, I have friends who say now that my memoir is published, I remember when you said you were going to Iowa and you said, I am not writing a memoir. And I think I'm sharing this in part just because I was so certain with the project I had that that would be my book. I was certain in my bones. And it's just amazing the way that something you can feel so certain about, there comes a point when you're also sort of willing to abandon it and to realize that this more open-ended path, this more terrifying path is worth following. So I worked hard on what gradually I realized was going to be a book, would be a memoir, and was fortunate enough, this is where my story maybe differs a little bit from some folks' stories. I did have an agent contact me when I was still working at the newspaper. And so I had this connection, I had this contact, but while I was here at Iowa, because my work previously for the paper had always been for public consumption, I decided to keep my head down. I decided not to try to publish. I decided just to have fidelity to the writing, to the story, to keep a kind of little bubble, keep a protected space for myself where I could just focus on it. Certainly I had external eyes in terms of workshop, but other than that, I didn't want to extend it. And so when I finished my thesis, my advisor here said, I think you're ready to send this out. And I still was resisting for a while. I wasn't quite sure, but eventually I thought, okay, I'll show it to this agent who I had this relationship with. And he also agreed that we were ready to try to take it out into the world, to share some of these sample chapters along with a proposal. And we can talk about more along those lines in the question and answer stage, but that's a little bit different for nonfiction than for fiction. Often with nonfiction, if you have some of what you believe your book will be, plus a proposal, that can be something that will sell the book. So I would say the book was, in my mind, I thought the book was like, I don't know, 3/4 of the way finished. 4 years later, it was published.
Should I go? All right. Well, if you don't get anything else from this talk, you already should tell yourself that things don't have to go the way you expect them to go. In fact, that's probably the way that you should approach it, other than maybe that little kernel in your mind where you think, I know I like to write, and I know I like to organize my thoughts that way, but otherwise, if you have these preconceived notions of how publishing is going to work, then you're probably going to slow yourself down in some ways. I like to start out by telling people that if I could be a publisher, then anyone in this room can be a publisher. Because honestly, I was at work and I walked to the bookstore every day and I would see books and I was like, oh yeah, back when I was in junior high, I wanted to be a writer and I was really interested in books. And then day after day, I kept going to the store and I thought, okay, I really need to do something about this. And so now, after 27 or 28 years as being a publisher, I can tell you I've did it without a degree in writing. I don't have a degree in marketing. I don't have a degree in business. I don't really have a degree in anything that would make sense that I would still be in business. And so sometimes I wonder what it is that does keep me going. And most of it is that I enjoy finding out other people's stories. And so I'm not really speaking as an author, as you can tell, because I'm a publisher. So we get the full spectrum. And so I've just realized that I love other people's stories. And so when people will say to you, oh, publishing's going away or writing's not going to be important anymore, I'm like, no, it's a great field to look for. It's fun to try and publish, and publishing is not going anywhere because we all love stories and we're all so good at telling them, especially if you take the time and you work with other people. There's no book ever written, as far as I know, that doesn't have a host of people to thank at the very end. And so when you think of your writing as that way, you realize you're really sharing a lot of other people's hopes and thoughts, and it's rewarding that way because my theme is sharing stories that help us better understand how we can live in the Midwest. And that takes a lot of forms. That's poetry and biography and memoir and fiction and nonfiction and photo books, children's books. If you get to make your own decisions, it's pretty easy to figure out what you want to publish because it takes on my own personality. And being a publisher also is partly just like being a writer, is that you learn to trust what it is you have to tell, and you believe in that. You may not know how you want to say it at first, but I knew that I wanted to publish the stories of where I lived, and so I've just always maintained that guideline. So I'll get books from outside of the Midwest, and people say it sort of seems like the Midwest, and I grew up in the Midwest. And I'll say, I don't really understand a Florida sunset. I understand that it's got colors, and I understand that there's an ocean, but I don't feel like a good judge of those sorts of things. And plus, there's so many stories just in this room. I'm sure that you don't really need to have the whole country as your playground anyhow. My favorite part of being a publisher now is absolutely hearing from new authors. But I'm not encouraging you all to give me all your stories, but like the enthusiasm of people that have written something, and when they come to me, is so much fun to witness that moment when they've decided to finally share it, and they feel like they've reached the spot where they feel comfortable sharing it with me. And I actually sort of, I reject a lot of people, so. And if you're worried about rejection, you shouldn't be, because your goal should just be to speed through the rejections to get to the good one. So, just don't worry about those rejections, please. It's a waste of your time. Just go, if I'm going to get 1 out of 100, be glad that someone said no within the first second, so you can find that 1 out of 100. So I don't take everything, obviously, but when I do pick one, it's so great to have them tell me their story. And then we sort of daydream what's going to happen next, and we sort of explore all the things that went into their book. And that's the part that excites me the most after all these years is finding something that I appreciate and getting captivated by the author's enthusiasm that they have to share. I could talk a long time, but how about I just anticipate questions soon?
There's a lot of humility on this panel. It's almost like you wouldn't know that this is a best-selling author, and Steve's an award-winning publisher. But I'll also add a story to a little bit of the non-traditional path, just to round out the group. When I decided to be a writer, I was working in advertising and living in Miami, and I moved my entire life back to Iowa, where I was born, but not because I was born here, because Iowa City had been named a city of literature, and because I believed that this would be the place that would really help me to find the resources, find the community, find the piece of my identity that was harder to really claim when I had so many pieces of myself sort of to keep track of in a more complicated life. So I really, I took a great leap coming back here, and I sort of skidded to the ground and walked off the plane and said, ta-da, City of Literature, here I am, surround me and all the things I'm looking for. And 6 months in, I didn't have a single page written. I didn't have a single writing friend. I did not have a writing group. And I was stalking people at the bookstore, looking over their shoulder and saying, are you reading that or are you writing? No, but the point is, it was this realization that part of being a writer for me was needing to do more than just write in my office by myself. I needed to be able to share that with people. I needed someone to read my work. I was 3/4 the way through a memoir that I was trying to decide if I wanted to continue on and if it was worthy of the continuation in its current form or if it needed to change. I needed that kind of feedback. And as it turned out, because Iowa City was the #1 program in the country in fiction and in poetry through the workshop, and then it had been for 3 years in nonfiction, there were so many incredible things going on inside the university. But outside the university, the City of Literature was about 5 years old, and so there was still really, I think, an opportunity and maybe a missing piece. And so I decided to take on this project that I called my 100 Coffees, and I set up 100 meetings with people in literature in Iowa City, including John Kenyon, the director of the City of Literature, Jen Weissmiller at Prairie Light, John DeGata, director of the nonfiction program, the list goes on. And the entire purpose of that project was to interview people and find out, one, if they thought there was a missing piece in the City of Literature, and two, if I were to create it, would they support it? And so the unanimous answer out of that project was that everyone agreed that there needed to be a place for writers in the community, that we were becoming, if not already, a global destination for writers, and that people should be able to take workshops and grow as writers and find community that weren't able to take 3 years to be in an MFA program, or maybe we're working towards that. And so became the Writers' House, and now 3 years in, we've been able to make quite an impact. But I think that really speaks to the fact that there isn't a traditional way to publish. What there is a way to be dedicated to writing. And I think the story that every one of these panelists is telling you is that the crooked path to getting there starts with fierce dedication and nose to the grindstone to the work. And having heard Inara teach at the Writers' House and listened to her introduction to the writers, a writer is someone who writes. And so the most important thing to do, I think, in trying to get to that point where you are ready to publish is to find yourself rigorous in your own process. And once you are ready then to start workshopping your work with a group, find that community. And whether that's inviting people to your basement and starting your own thing, or whether that's coming to the Writers' House and being part of a workshop or a writing group, or sending it out to people, that part is so important. And my life right now is immersed in that process, creating that process for other people and creating it also for myself. Because I continue to write and feel that my dedication now, having this resource here, is increasing only daily. And it's been fun to have conversations with Julia, who has been running a literary center for 15 years now. And, she started it because she wanted people in her life to help her in her writing. And so I think when that is the reason, first and foremost, publication can be the next, step and point of discussion. So I love that we started the panel with the craft, because it had to.
And I'm staying at the Iowa Writers' House this weekend. It's one of the most beautiful houses I've ever stayed in. And also teaching a craft class tomorrow, if you want to join us. Yes. You can ask us about that later. And I do think that we all do what we do because we needed to, right? In the beginning, I was teaching all the classes at Sacker Street, 4 nights a week in my kitchen with my children being practically, sort of muzzled in the back by my husband. And it was what I needed. And I loved what you were saying about the bubble, how you have to. I think the hardest thing, everyone here who's a writer is doing it because you need to write. Nobody writes, not to be negative, because it's fun, right? Fun is I don't know, I want it to be an actor, an actress. But, we do it because we need to. And I think that there's a difference between writing and publishing. There's a difference between the process, and sometimes we have to protect that process of writing. So I've become very protective, which is hypocritical, coming from a woman who runs a writer's workshop. And, and I have the benefit of teaching, even though I don't teach now, I direct the workshop, and that's how I learned to write. So I do think that there are times, one of the hardest things about being a writer is knowing what you need at that point in your life. Because what I wish someone had told me when I was 24 was that your writing life changes as your life changes. I thought I was going to be the writer that I was at 24 forever. I'm a completely different writer, the writer I needed to be. And so I think that, and my process has changed. I had children. I was, teaching 4 nights a week and also adjuncting at the same time and running the business. And so I do think that there are times when, for me, when I had that first big rejection, I removed myself from this scene. Okay, so even to the point where I wasn't even going to that many bookstores. And so I knew that I needed to almost protect myself. And a lot of writing and publishing is about self-reliance, because there are times when you're going to have to be your own editor, your own agent, your own publicist for sure, yeah. Right? Because that is across the board, whether you publish with a big commercial publisher or a smaller press. And so I do think it's this combination of knowing when you need to be self-reliant and sort of protect yourself. I only have 1 or 2 readers now. And then also knowing when you need a community and when you're ready to sort of share your work. Sometimes I give people my work, this is embarrassing. And I'm just tell me that it's good. because it's like the first 50 pages of a novel and I'm not ready for someone to be like, I don't know, because I'm like just scared. You need that like delusional confidence, right? I'm like, just read it and then say, okay, and then don't talk to me for a month. But there's so many different, I think, phases and processes, but I do think it's important, this idea of, protecting yourself, being patient. Oh man, is that like the hardest thing ever? Being patient. And my suggestion to even some nonfiction writers that I teach is, it depends on the writer. Some people can handle selling a proposal and then writing the book. But for some, I don't think I would have been able to do that, even though I am a fiction writer. But so even though with my second book I sold it on a partial manuscript, which wouldn't have been good for me 15 years ago, but I needed that deadline and that check that I cashed, a very small check, but to make me finish the book. So it's different, Hopefully that was helpful.
It was helpful. So this panel is called Stories That Sell, and I thought maybe what we could do is talk a little bit about some of the trends that we're seeing in the industry, and that can come from your own experience of working with your publishing experience, or Steve, a little bit about some of the things that you're seeing, and if you want, you can reference a little bit in terms of your last publication, the questions that people ask you, or maybe some of the things that you looked at changing in terms of what was happening.
Man, I really wish I could answer that question perfectly, because if I could, I wouldn't be here right now.
What are you excited about seeing right now?
Well, no, I was going to add quickly, though, which I like to say at groups like this, is that, and I'll get to the answer, I promise, the best answer I have, but I like to point out that a lot of the times people have too high of expectations or this image in their mind of what it means to be published. And so I think that there's a lot of competition in people's minds anyway. Like if you get published at a smaller publisher, or at if you don't have a huge advance, or if you don't have just the thing that you think is going to make you the best author in your mind that you can be, there's just no way to underestimate how important it is that the person that picks your writing to publish, that you should appreciate that part. Because it sort of seems like people will say, well, I was with a small press, or I was with just this little magazine. But I don't really think that you should look at it that way, because a lot of writers, maybe even if they've had a few books out, you should still feel satisfied with yourself. And I just don't like people to think that if they didn't get the big New York City publishers, that somehow they haven't achieved this thing that they think a writer is. And so I just hope that you'll all keep that in mind as you go along. You definitely haven't let yourself down if you don't find the biggest, most popular publisher that you envisioned when you first started. And maybe that's a plug for myself, but I also just sort of feel a lot of writers feel a little bit like they haven't achieved something. But you find the people that are there to help you along the way. And if that happens to be someone like me, or if that happens to be HarperCollins, then that's what you were intended to do. So I just don't want people to feel like they haven't done something right if they don't get what they think is the most popular thing. And as for what sells, it's like listening to what sells is what you learn to trust that you think is going to sell, and what you trust is a good thing to write about. You have to feel like you understand what's going on in the world around you, and I've learned to trust the things that interest me as a book publisher. And so I recently picked a book that had to do with women and the land, and they came to me and they presented the book, and I usually am a little skeptical of every new project because it means a lot of work for me, and I can't really afford to bomb on a book because I'm just me. And if I spend the money to do that book, then I have to feel like I have to have a really good feeling about it, and I need to know that the author I'm working with is someone that I can work with. And so what sells for me is someone that I feel has motivation. They have a story that relates to what I want to share with people, because my idea is that people have learned to trust my vision of what's a good book. And so when they say, oh, that publisher's come out with another book, they're like, I trust what he does, and so now I'm interested in the next thing he does. And that's part of the part of just the journey of doing it for a while. And when I first started, I thought I would only do environmental writing on rivers and trees and fly fishing and that was it. I was positive there was more than enough to do that way, and there is still, but I'm not interested in it as much as I was before, and so it's not something that I focus on all the time. And now I'm more interested in memoirs and stories of how Iowans lived around World War II. I have a historical novel coming out with a family in southwest Iowa during World War II in Pearl Harbor. And we all kind of think we know how those stories go, but of course we have a generic story in mind. But when you read the historical version, you realize more details and what it really means to live at that time period. And so, I don't know exactly what sells, because I don't have, I haven't sold 1 million copies of anything yet, but I'm satisfied with the things that I do sell, the numbers that I do reach. And I owe that to just my ability to connect with authors and to trust what I believe in, which is what I hope as writers will do also.
Beautiful.
It's one of those questions where there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance that you have to kind of introduce, because on the one hand, of course, you have to be aware of how publishing works as a business, and you have to understand that at each house there are only so many books that they can possibly publish in any given year. And so the editors, of course, want to follow their hearts and follow what they feel passionate about, but then they also are accountable to marketing and publicity at the various houses. And so you have to have some sense of awareness of what they might be looking for that they believe will sell to help support their business. On the other hand, I think that to spend a whole lot of time trying to anticipate what will sell can be the path toward madness. I actually had a conversation just the other night. I'm currently advising the third year MFA students. This is their final year. They're working on their theses. We're in a workshop together that's specifically devoted to that. And one of the students is sort of having a crisis about their particular project. And at the end of it, it's sort of that moment of, will you just tell me if this is good or not? His moment was sort of like, but will this sell? Like, will this be marketable? And I just had to say, you can't do that. Were you to do that, were you to imagine that there's some kind of paint by numbers, and you go ahead and you write something, you put in all those hours and spend all that time, years, and you write something that you think someone else wants to see, and they still say no, right? The best advice I can possibly give is to find that thing that you are absolutely committed to, that you love, that you really believe needs to have a home in the world. That might sound sort of Pollyannish, but I believe that's where you have to start. And then there are some things that you can do to think about how you shape it, how you talk about it to other people. And so I come to you a little bit from the future. One of the really kind of exciting and wonderful things that can happen when you take a book out to sell is that different editors will express interest, serious interest, and then have the opportunity to have conversations with you. And so in my case, I had this really incredible couple of weeks where I was talking one-on-one with editors who edit books that I adore. And they were long conversations in almost every single case. And what I learned, though, from those conversations was I started to get a sense of what piques editors' interests, what are the things that they tend to be looking for. And so this will be somewhat general, but I think this could be helpful. They're looking for stories that at once are both particular, and by that I say a story that only you can tell, right? You have a kind of authority, an expertise. You are the only person who could write this. At the same time, it has a kind of universal reach. So deeply particular, yet there is a way in which it extends outward. Last night I was talking with one of the writers who was here, and he's written a biography on Hemingway. And at first, when he was conceiving of the biography, he was thinking Hemingway in Kansas City, because that's where he lives, and that's where he thought this would be the thing that would sell. It would be particular. But then he went to a conference and he was listening to someone speak, and he realized, oh goodness, it's not that. It's really Hemingway at 18. So suddenly it went from very particular to much more outward, and that was the moment when the book sold. And so the other thing to think about too is the sense of what will people learn? And you can define that very broadly, but it really got a sense as I was talking to editors that they wanted a feeling that someone would take something away from this particular story that would change the way that they either thought about the world or looked at the world or thought about themselves. Sometimes it can be a specific thing, of course, right? You're teaching someone about the world. But in terms of like literature, they were really looking for something that, in essence, the book would continue after its last lines to kind of live and evolve inside the reader. The other thing that they want to know is that something changes over the course of the book. They don't want the book to just sort of be a closed circle. Yeah, they really want, and then sometimes they'll ask you in a very particular way that can feel frustrating, right? Well, how is the character going to be different at the end? Or in my case, it was very difficult because I was still writing the memoir. Well, how are you going to be different at the end? I don't know. But you have to kind of find the words for that or to think about that. But that sense, there's got to be some sort of movement. There's got to be some sort of change or transition. And I'll stop there, but those I feel like it's not a great way to tell you that, oh, today it's books about dogs or it's memoirs about this or that. Yeah. I don't know, but those principles seem to apply.
Readers like that also, that, yeah. I mean, we're all readers first. Yes. Like, I think of myself more as a reader than a writer, because I write because I love to read. I write to escape, which is the same reason I read and have always read. But this second novel that just came out that I wrote, The Gypsy Moth Summer, the characters change, and my editor was so proud of me. And I was really proud of myself. And then when I was out doing my tour and like talking to readers, the character that they talked about the most was the person that changed the most, which of course, I'm a fiction writer, so my sort of, what I'm about to say is different, because I think there are more, I don't know, maybe there's more recognizable trends in nonfiction, but I mean, we're being videotaped, so I'm not gonna curse, but you know what, with trends in fiction, because I think actually one of the best things, and there's not a ton about publishing, is, and especially big publishing like the commercial publishers, is that they don't know. No one knows what is trending. And so that's why, there's books, there's novels that all the publishers get really, really excited about. They almost talk themselves into like a fit. They go to auction and they spend way too much money on a book that is about something that like is very not what you would think is trendy. I think that it's still like a bit of a gambling sort of industry. Like they're looking for whatever, they're like, this might be the next hot thing. It's like a very American dream kind of concept. It's like, the unlimited promise, like what's next, And so I guess it sounds Pollyanna-ish, but really I'm coming from a more jaded, experienced place, which is, I can tell you that what you should do is not think about trends in fiction. Don't read about publishing. Don't sign up for Publishers Marketplace or any of those other sites. I mean, I speak at so many publishing conferences, so I feel kind of bad because I'm like, but sometimes I'm like, I want to, kidnap everybody in this conference room, not here because this is a writing festival, and run away with them, and be like, don't listen to the agents. But
listen to the teachers.
Because I think that it's true that it's not what you're writing, it's how you're writing it. Right? And so if you write about what you need to write about, because really for us, writing is a selfish act. Like, we're doing it because we need to. We're doing it because we're trying to make sense of something that is meaningful to us, or we're trying to answer a question that we just can't stop obsessing about, or a place, So I think that you have to remain, fascinated and in a constant state of wonder about whatever it is that you're writing about, to keep writing, because it's so tedious. But I do think that I have friends who are New York Times bestsellers, and they swear that they set out to write a New York Times bestseller. And sometimes I'll be on panels with them, and I'm like, shut up. You did not. You just got lucky. Or your publisher put like a certain amount of money behind the book, because in order for a book to be a bestseller, they have to print like a certain amount of books. It's not, we can only control what we can control, and that's the book as we're writing it. So I do think that, and when I was at the workshop, I did not go to an Ivy League school. I did not get good grades. My SAT scores are probably lower than everyone in this room. And, but hey, look at me now. And I remember being like, God, these writers are so ambitious. Like, they were working on projects because they started the project with the idea, I'm going to write a project about this because it's a marketable topic. And I was like, should I be doing that? And I tried to for a while, and then I was like, no, I have to write about what I need to write about. It's just too much work to, unless you're a very ambitious, organized person, I'm sure you could do it. Anyways.
I wanted to say something with that. That's the perfect idea, is that you meet a lot of writers, and I think that they make the mistake of jumping to the publishing thing too soon. Because as a writer, you should fully immerse yourself and enjoy the process of writing, because for most of you, that's probably going to be the most enjoyable part. And so if you just sort of jump to the end and start imagining how it's going to get published and who's going to publish it, then I don't think you get the full enjoyment of just having the thrill of writing it in the first place, which is where the best way to get your book published is to be exactly all the things that you've said, is to do the thing that inspires you the best that you can, and not sort of shortchange yourself along the way.
I love where this panel went, because this is the City of Literature, and so I think, we wanted to provide a publishing panel because it's an important step, but it's not surprising at all that where it ended up back is craft and authenticity and doing what you believe in, because I think that's what the city believes in a lot of ways too, and especially all of us here. So we have about 10 minutes left, and we'd love to take questions from you and find out what you're interested in.
We may or may not answer.
And there is a microphone to ask back there. Okay.
Oh my gosh, I know you guys have questions.
You must be a good charades player.
Yeah, I was not getting what the cameraman was saying. Cheryl, would you mind stepping up to the microphone there? It's right behind you and over to the left.
Well, and you have the opportunity to use a microphone.
Yes.
I guess I was thinking about this trend thing, and what if the book that you really need to write is your experience hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, and Cheryl Strait has already written that book, for example?
Such a great question.
Yeah, that's more difficult.
I mean, I have, all right, I mean, I have a specific answer to this. Has anyone read the book, The Fever by Megan Abbott? So it's a story about, there was this New York Times magazine feature about these girls in upstate New York who were all having these hysterical fits. And it was fascinating, right? And I even was like, I gotta write a novel about this, right? So I read all the Saka Street applications, all of them. And all of a sudden I started seeing like many women writers, right? Like maybe 5 or 6 writing about this topic. And then one of my students actually, who then came to Iowa and got her MFA here, and she had already started a novel about it. And then you hear that this, sort of well-known author has published so many books, won an Edgar Award, has already sold a book on the topic. And, my student, who's now a very accomplished writer, has written 2 books, published 2 books, probably written many more, as we all have. And she was like, what am I going to do? And my gut was like, no, stop, like, write about something else. And then I was like, wait, no, you're going to write about it in a totally different way. And she said it in a different place in Texas where she had grown up. It was completely different. And I don't think anyone has even compared the two books, and they were published within a year of each other. So I don't know. I mean, I agree like that would be a problem, and I could see definitely like when you're going to, editors, when you're or agents, or you're sending your work out to agents or editors, they're going to be saying, "Oh, that's already been done," or this, and this. But I think that, her agent was like, believed in her and was like, "I know you're going to make it different," and but I mean, maybe you could speak more to the nonfiction elements. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think, though, obviously, if it was identical in the sense that you're like, yeah, I want to write about exactly this, that would be difficult. But I agree also, I think in the nonfiction world, there is a lot of room and recognition for the fact that so much is driven by the writer's particular voice and perspective and how they're approaching it. And the singularity of that is what is really critical. If I had a student who came to me and was desperate that this is what they really wanted to do, though, I think I would spend some time and think less about the specificity of that particular point in time in their life and more about what it is thematically that they're interested in getting at and seeing. I would guess if someone was interesting enough to have done that there are other interesting parts in their life that we might be able to see that there's a way to kind of extend the lens outward beyond.
Well, yeah, one of the best compliments you can give yourself as a writer is how do you fit in with someone else that's written similarly to you? And so it's also not that, I mean, if no one's usually writing the most original thing in history, even though they might think in their mind, but like I like to sort of see this thing being moved along. And so you can compare yourself with someone else. And I mean, we could probably, if everyone wrote about being at this meeting right now, there'd be all our different versions of it, and some of them would stand out and some of them wouldn't, and so they would never replicate each other. And so that's all back to what we were saying before about the passion, what you bring to it, your unique perspective, your motivation. And so I mean, if someone came to me and said, you were Cheryl Strayed's twin sister and you wrote almost the same words, maybe like, I feel like I read this one before, but chances are I probably will not get that feeling.
I mean, if you write that book, I'll connect you with Cheryl and you can get a good blurb maybe. But I do think also, just briefly, we haven't talked about publicity that much after you've been published. But every year, I mean, because I know just so many, I know so many published writers, and every year, there's writers who have books come out around the same theme. And often what I did with my first book, which I didn't even realize was a mommy novel, which I thought it was just about women and they happen to have children. But, that's the marketing. Once you cross over, it's not your book in the same way. So what I did was I found other writers who were writing about parenting, and we, did lots of events together and panels. And so in some ways, writers need each other so much in all the different phases of writing, publishing, that I think that idea of like competition isn't even, it's so hard to sell books that it's a different sort of challenge, in terms of selling books. Like, it's not so much about, but I do think in the pre-publication period, I'm sure there would be agents and editors who'd be like, well, how's this going to be different?
Yeah. Or I can repeat the question for you if you want.
I'm curious about like really immersing yourself in reading. Right now I'm in this period where I'm just reading as much as I possibly can. But I always find myself thinking, should I be reading things similar to what I'm writing? Should I be reading things that are completely different? Should I be reading big press and I want to be small press published? Should I be reading small press? Like, how do you choose reading that can eventually fuel your writing?
That's such a great question. Did everyone hear? The question is, she's wanting to know what she should be focusing on as a reader, because should she be reading what she wants to write, or should she be kind of reading prolifically across different genres and categories?
I think you should read everything.
I think you're gonna have, that's gonna be the consensus.
That's going to be the consensus up here.
I mean, I'm at the point now where I am learning from everything, like, because, you know, I've taught myself how to see meaning in everything and wonder, and also it's part of my personality, probably. I'm a little obsessive. But I think that, like, you know, I learned from television, even bad television, which all the writers hate when I talk about this on panels, like the snobby writers. But I think that, and I also read a lot of work that is not like I write more realistic fiction, but I love genre benders. So I really think it's more about how you read. And I think you should reserve time for reading for fun and escape, because that's why we're here. That's why we write, you know, and then have time for reading. Honestly, I don't even think it matters what it is, and really read with that hyper-focused writer's perspective, where you're, maybe get a pencil out and like circle moments where you're like, cool point of view technique, cool tone technique, like pacing, you know, like really reading to learn, because that's how I learned to be a writer. You know, at the workshop, I learned how to think like a writer. You know, I learned how to kind of talk like a writer, but I learned how to write by reading just thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of rough student work. You know, and probably the writing, the work that was least like my work taught me the most, because I had to work the hardest to be like, okay, what does this story want to be? You know, how can I help, you know, with this writer, or how can I examine this piece in a way that I can figure out what this story or this novel excerpt wants to be, and what choices need to be made. So really just analyzing the technical choices, but saving that sacred space for fun.
Can I give you a really confusing answer to it? Like, if you're going to do magic realism, for instance, you should probably read some magical realism. But on the other hand, there's nothing more exciting than reading things, all the things, and discovering ties with almost everything to what you're doing. And a lot of the times that seems the most exciting. But on the other hand, you should probably have some understanding of what it is that you're writing. So I don't know what level you're at. Like, if you decided yesterday you want to write magical realism, you've never read one before, you should probably read some of them. But then again, Time Magazine might be like, wait a second, I can see a tie right here between what I'm trying to do and this seemingly random thing. So that's a confusing answer for you, but you can merge it into your idea.
I just want to add to this very quickly that I think one of the things that's really important to be thinking about and just remembering is that I truly believe when we lock eyes with particular books, we are locking eyes because there's some form of recognition there. There's something where we see what we want to be able to do as a writer, that there's a kind of kinship that happens in that moment. And then what follows is the struggle to sort of find a way to bridge the gap between that recognition and what you are able to do to kind of get there. And so it's important to hold on to those particular books, those books with which you locked eyes, and imagine in some ways how what you want to do will sit on the same shelf, how it will be in conversation with that. But then again, I also believe in reading books that provide a kind of resistance. I think it's important to read things that we don't identify with at all aesthetically. I know for me, coming to Iowa and being the journalist, what I learned the most from were the lyric texts, the lyric essayists. I didn't become a lyric essayist, but I felt like that was where, in some cases, because that provided in some ways the most resistance, was least familiar to me, that was where I was able to make some pretty incredible discoveries once I worked associationally. How would that apply to my own writing? That brought breakthrough. I think every time you read, a last piece of advice is to constantly have in the back of your mind, and this will revise and flip almost like a billboard, what do I need right now as a writer, right? Kind of walk through the world constantly thinking, what do I need right now as a writer? Maybe it's about transitions. Maybe it's about language. Maybe it's about structure. And then make sure as you're reading, you're hacking every reading to that question. So you're looking for answers everywhere, always. But that question is, like I said, it will revise. And then finally, like when I was writing my book, I reached a point where I did not want to read anything like it at all, like nothing. And so I was reading just a ton of poetry during that time because I wanted to be really thinking in a concentrated way about language. And it was just kind of wonderful to like not have anything related, research-wise, other writer-wise, just a totally different place for my brain to be inside.
Also, point of view is important if you're a fiction writer. So, you know, I write, my 2 books, published books, have been alternating third-person point of view. So I've read a lot of those, and it's because that's what I love to read. So, like, I walk into a bookstore, and I'm like, hi, what new alternating third-person point of view books do you have? And they're like, oh, Julia. But, you know, you should follow me on Facebook. I can ask my many, many, many writer friends. We have these amazing POV threads where I'm like, what's your favorite first-person retrospective, time frame, point of view, and just get like all these great, you know, book lists. But I do think that point of view is essential to study, you know, if you're writing in a particular point of view.
I want to thank my fellow panelists. This has been wonderful. I also want to invite the audience to join us at Merge for the book fair. There are so many tables over there. Julia will be there for a while. If you want to talk to her about her point of view workshop, you can. If you want to learn more about the Iowa Writers House, sign up and come to some of our future events. We'd love to have you join our community and be part of this. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day.